Civilized Society.
Hereditary. Great movie. It's great and horrible. This is what I always tell everybody, and every time I talk about this movie, I say it's the worst movie, and that's what makes it great. It's actually so hard. I don't know. It's really hard for me to watch this movie. I think that this director, who directs it, I'm not, so on target today. You're gonna have to come through with the facts this episode.
This film is directed by Ari Aster.
Aster, yeah, that's it. Yeah, it is him, which is cool because it's like really. I think it's a masterful. How would you say, like, representation of what a horror movie should be? Because he does really, and we'll get into this in the later part, but just to kind of warm up with some appreciation for a truly traumatizing movie. It's just, there's just these scenes in this movie that you never forget. I mean, they truly are imprinted onto my brain. I have lost sleep thanks to Ari Aster and this movie. Like, on several occasions, every time I watch this movie, it doesn't matter because it's just, he has such an innate, such a deep understanding of what horror is that, he really does the right thing. Because, you can watch a movie that's, like, gory and whatever and be like, oh, well, that person's stupid. Why did they go in that creepy building? If you get, beheaded in a creepy building, what you doing in there, But in a movie like this, you sympathize with all the characters and you're so invested in it. And when the scenes of horror come, you're so in it. And it's something so well done, so natural, so right about each scene of horror, the truly horrific scenes in the film that, oof, man, I wonder what I would like to be his therapist, and what's
Do you
wrong
hear
with him?
that?
Fuck.
Do you hear that?
Nope.
I hear the clamoring of the digital audience for the word of the podcast.
Oh, I thought you were gonna like go into like a possession theatrics, kind of. Well,
no, not today.
That's for part 2 of Hereditary, is all the demonic possessions shit, which is very cool. And don't be upset if we don't cover it in this podcast because we gon' cover it, but it's too much for one full episode. It cometh.
The word of the podcast.
I wish we had music for the word of the podcast, like a kind of like.
Okay.
What was that like NBC? Remember the Peacock NBC thing that was like doo doo doo. And then
I do. There's 3 notes.
Then it would be the word of the podcast. Dun, dun, dun. Word of the podcast. Well, go on.
We now may be kicked off of YouTube for using copyright NBC tones.
Yeah, or talking about anything horrific or whatever, having an opinion. At this point, yeah, we're ready to. You're picked off at any moment. So enjoy it. We're enjoying it while
word
we can.
Word of the podcast.
Dun, dun, dun. Fuck with me, YouTube.
The word of the podcast is Charles.
It's a good one.
Sounds like a simple word, and it is a simple word. But Charles comes from the old. What? Look. Why are you laughing about the word of the podcast?
Sounds like a simple word. And it is. I like it.
There are no words that are simple. There are no words that are simple.
It's true. Only fools.
Charles comes from the... So look, here's the thing about the word Charles. Charles comes from the old Germanic Karl, Karl. Karl's also a name of people. Some people are named Karl.
Yeah, they are.
But it means... Yeah, they are. But it means... ultimately, it means man. Don't kick me off YouTube for saying that.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
I'm just doing etymology. Charlie, from Karl, meaning man.
Interesting.
Later, it became associated with royalty in Western Europe. And
As
there's a
men
lot of
often
different
were.
kings named. There's a lot of kings named Charles, obviously, throughout history. But the reason it's the word of the podcast is because the character, Charlie, is a girl in the film, but there's a lot going on there about that. There's a lot going on about gender, and we'll get into that. But I'm just giving the word of the podcast today. It is Charles, or Charlie if you like, or Karl if you like. Karl, meaning man, from the Germanic. All
Well,
right. Word of the
that's
podcast. Done.
all right. Settle down there. Word of the podcast.
It's my favorite time of the month. I call it the month because we're supposed to be recording weekly, but I shouldn't have given away that insider information.
You shouldn't let people know what kind of operation we're running here. We got what do they call those secrets? Corporation secrets? Proprietary knowledge of our dysfunctional schedules. I'd like to inquire more about the word of the podcast. So,
Please.
The thing with Charlie is there is kind of this. She says at one point in the film, Grandma wanted me to be a boy, I think, and there is with the demon in this film, Payman, which is the big kind of, I don't know, demonic figure for the whole film.
Spoiler alert.
I mean, if you're watching this and you haven't watched Hereditary, I mean, I guess you could, but
yeah, don't damn our audience for just wanting to hear it from the source first.
From the source, like years after the movie comes out.
I'll tell you something about that. And this movie did scare this movie. Okay, when I saw this movie the first time, I came to the conclusion that it was the most frightening film I had seen for at least a decade.
Yeah.
And I just picked a decade randomly. Though not totally randomly, because there were some French horror films about a decade before that actually scared me a lot. There was the scene. See, I don't like to do confessions. I don't like to do video confessions. I think that's a bad
What's a video
mode
confession?
of communication. When you confess things about your private life.
Oh, okay. Yeah, don't do that. I don't want you
But
to
I'm
do
going to
that.
confess something.
Oh.
Well, I'm about to. The scene in which Charlie was having the attack and she was decapitated in a car accident.
Yeah.
I hid my eyes briefly.
Oh no.
As a reaction of a man who is I'm pretty Charlie man, Like I'm relatively Charlie man. I got a Charlie
you're
man
pretty
beard.
hardcore.
And
say
it
it
was
so that you
and
don't
this is
have
just
to.
a testament. Thank you. I don't mind saying I'm pretty hardcore. There's a testament to how scary this film is, though, is that I actually reacted physically
It's visceral.
like
it's
that.
This carnal scene. I mean,
Visceral.
that scene, man. That's one of the scenes that I think is just. It's actually fucked up, but it's beautifully done. Because and it's not the beheading part. It's just the whole scene is an aftermath essentially. The beheading is a blink. The actual scene that you suffer in is the aftermath of it. That doesn't show Charlie. Doesn't show the body. Doesn't show. You never see her again.
You see her again.
Yeah.
You see her with the ants.
Yeah. You don't,
And you
don't
see part
her,
of the body.
Yeah, but you don't see. You don't see the gore of that scene. You only see the I mean, you do later. You see the head later, whatever, but this is a whole different scene. In that scene, you are only watching what is the kid's name? Peter, right? Yeah, Peter's reaction. And it feels so long. They do such a good job of making it feel so real and so accurate to what it feels like to undergo a trauma like that, and you feel it creeps into you in some way. It's a scene that makes you feel almost tainted through having watched it. You feel it so much. It's a really well done scene. But yeah, it is one of the most frightening and well done horror movies I've seen in a long time. Like it is truly one of the most masterful horror movies I've seen in a long time, and it should be. It's
in a tradition.
Respect. Yeah.
It's in a tradition of horror films like Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, to a degree. There's a subgenre of horror movies that are about demonic possession. This isn't an exorcism movie though. That's a little different. But it's there's a tradition of horror movies that are about, usually it's just they just say Satan. And this
Yeah.
one was even more frightening because they picked an obscure figure from demonology
Yeah.
to say, was the actual the culprit.
Yeah, it's a really hardcore movie, but I like it. So going on now to one of the main things in this, the main theme, one of the main themes in this movie that I thought was so interesting to make a horror movie and to have this theme so front and center, because it doesn't seem I've thought about it before, the idea of free will and how it relates to horror. Because when you watch these movies, when you watch a horror movie, you kind of feel it. There's almost this a little bit of a grotesque thing in it, because you're watching these. They're fictional, but you grant them personhood while you watch the film. It's not like I watch them like, well, these people aren't real anyway. What kind of person watches a movie like that? You pretend that it's real. You pretend that these are real people and that they're having real experiences and this could happen or whatever, so that you can truly enjoy the film properly. And so when you watch a horror movie, though, I've thought about it before, but I've never seen it so clearly in a film. The idea that the characters are doomed. You're watching this movie knowing that these characters, or at least some of them, ain't gonna make it. And it's this weird sense of they're fighting against fate. A lot of the characters are fated. And, fated to be killed by the serial killer, fated to whatever it is that is the threat of the movie. And really, we watch it in this way to see, like, will they get away? How will they die? Who will get away? But you know that there's a degree of fate that these characters are they're facing, and there's not much they can do to escape it. And in this movie, the idea of free will is so prominent, and I thought it was a great way to kind of understand the debate of free will, because I know that there's mainly two schools of thought when it comes to free will, which is it exists and it doesn't. It's really not. There's not a lot of. You could complicate it, but really it comes down to these two schools of thought. And what I thought was so interesting to watch this movie through the lens of understanding free will, and whether it exists and what it looks like if it doesn't exist, is that the movie starts out pretty early with how would you say, a sign of fate, a hint that these characters are fated. And that's probably fairly common for horror. You see the little flash of, oops, here's the threat. And you wonder, well, how will this character face this threat? Will they escape it? Will they overcome? In this movie, it's very clear that there's an impending fate, and it starts with the letter.
What scene is that?
It starts with the letter that the grandma leaves to Annie that says, essentially, that I've put something in motion, and please forgive me that I was not able to tell you of all these things, but it will be worth it. We're going to have riches or whatever it is that she says, like, this is for, but it's essentially a letter that says there's something coming and sorry about it, but it's going to happen. And this is essentially, she finds her fate, which is a really interesting scene.
Well, it starts even earlier than that in a way, right? With the beginning of you're looking at a dollhouse.
That's a big part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dollhouse.
There was one aspect of that I wanted to touch on, which is, and this gets into the idea of magic and medieval hermeticism and a lot of stuff that we're not going to cover this.
No, that'll
episode.
Come later on. Yeah.
Right.
Too much.
But there is it's something it really just came to mind right before we began to record here, which is the notion of as above, so below. And so there's this microcosm and macrocosm, and you see the microcosm in the microcosm in the dollhouse, and this gets complicated, so I'm not going to go into it a lot. But the idea that things are determined by someone above you. The main character in this film is creating the dollhouse and creating the scenes in the dollhouse, and again, I think we need to deal with these complex subjects in a different podcast, because this goes into this document called the Emerald Tablet, which was a 8th or 9th century writing that came from, well, I'm gonna stop myself anyway.
Well,
because
you can't do that. You gotta, if you're gonna explain what it is, you gotta explain what it is. Okay.
Okay. In brief, the idea of as above, so below is a maybe somewhat slightly mistranslated from the Arabic to the Latin portion of a document called the Emerald Tablet, the second verse of that, which is a Gnostic or or a document from Hermeticism that then makes its way into medieval Europe and becomes the basis for a lot of occult study for centuries later, all the way up into the 19th century, where people like in the spiritualists and the I'm not sure, Blavatsky, people like that.
Theosophical Society.
This lasts for a very long time, and to trace all that through is too much. So, and I'm not. I think that we need to do an episode strictly on that if we're going to do it.
Yeah, is
that fair?
I think that's fair, because it is a lot. Well, you know, what I like about that, though, is because it ties into, again, the idea of free will. This as above, so below concept, it sounds like the argument against free will, which is an argument of determinism. And really, you can see, so the Grandma's Letter is this document that kind of says, your future is predetermined. Something has happened before that sets in motion things that will happen in your future, and that future is predetermined. And this ties into it's very one of the early arguments against free will, which came from a French-German philosopher, Baron d'Holbach. This is like in the 1700s, and essentially he was one of the early proponents of free will not existing. And he said everything is the inevitable result of what came before. And so that ties in really nicely with the Grandma's Letter, I think, because it is this idea that whatever you do tomorrow was already predetermined by yesterday. And that is the argument against free will, is that everything you do is merely the next link in a chain of events that has already been set in motion. And
I reject it.
I reject it too. And we're going to reject that through this movie, because I think this movie actually does reject it too. So here's the thing, though, with the dollhouses is very interesting, because I love the dollhouses as a kind of device in this movie, because it's such a cool and clear way to argue about free will, because this theme pops up several times. So here you have Annie working with the dollhouses, and this is the idea that the dolls are these pawns that are completely controlled, and their entire universe is predetermined by a larger force, a creator, which is Annie in this case. So the dollhouse is, and it's an interesting parallel to the horror movie itself, because in the horror movie, it's kind of that same idea of, well, I'm watching these poor fools try to escape a fairly predetermined fate. And in this dollhouse, you have the same thing of these figures being placed around with no real will about where they will go or what they do. They're simply moved by a larger force. And that's a really interesting thing to consider with the demon aspect of this. And there's also a major mental illness aspect of this movie, which can also tie into that idea of how much are your decisions controlled by you, and how much are your life controlled by these circumstances or forces that are larger than you. And the interesting thing here is that, well, big argument, free will. It's hard. There's so many ways to go at it. So
I can make it really simple.
no, I don't want to make it really simple.
I can't.
I don't want to
going
make
to,
it
though, briefly, and then I will sit silently and listen to you
Yeah,
explain
okay.
to me a concept that human beings have been dealing with for like 2,000 years.
Yeah.
In a 10-minute podcast segment, which is one of the. I mean, I reject determinism. It's a big statement. I reject it because even if it's true, there is no way to function at the height of your abilities if you believe it's true.
Exactly.
And if it's not true, it doesn't matter. If everything is determined, then it doesn't matter anyway. Also, it seems to me, and again, better minds, more sound minds, I'm sure, have dealt with this subject more so than myself. But okay, if all the characters in this movie, Hereditary, are basically determined and their outcome is determined, then it's determined by who? Okay, well, it's determined by Lord Payman, right? But then is Lord Payman's everything? Is he called Lord Payman or King Payman? Sorry,
Yeah.
Payman, King Payman. Are all of King Payman's decisions and beliefs and will determined by something else? Okay, if so, then by what? And then it becomes this kind of, the thing I don't understand about determinism is that it seems like it's this infinite regress of you. Then you require some sort of first principle that did have some sort of will.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's complex. I will silently now listen to you explain why I have free will.
Okay.
Or don't.
No, I also reject determinism. I wholly reject this idea that we don't have free will. And it's for the same idea. It's not here's the thing. When you look at ideas like this, I think there's two ways to approach it, which is, okay, we can argue the actual details and the merits of each philosophy, and then you can argue the pragmatism of each outcome. And since you can't prove it. You can't prove we have free will, and you can't prove we don't have it. And I don't know if we ever will be able to prove that, but for sure right now we cannot do that. Hence the argument. Now, then you can decide, well, since we can't prove it, let's see which functions better. And this is actually something you can prove. So the idea that there is no free will is an interesting one because it parallels some more clinical versions of this idea that are in psychology. And one of this is called the locus of control. So there's an outer and an inner locus of control. And this is, people differ on how largely they reside in one or the other, how largely they attribute their life to being to items that are outside or within their locus of control. And so this, an example would be your ability to learn a subject. You can take this challenge and decide whether it's outside your control or inside your control. The person with an inner locus of control would say, well, I can choose how often I study. I can choose the way I study. I can choose whether I seek help and who I seek help to study from. I can choose all these different approaches to improving my studying. They would focus on the ways that they can affect that challenge. A person with an outer locus of control would say, well, I don't have more hours in the day than, I'm restricted by these many hours of the day. I'm restricted by whether I can go to this university or not. I'm restricted by the socioeconomic standard that I have. Maybe I don't have access to the best tutors. I'm restricted by the knowledge that I have access to. If I haven't learned about a certain study habit, then I simply don't have access to this. And this would be someone that of course, also, I'm restricted by my own cognitive abilities. I may not be as talented at math as another person who is more naturally talented. I'm restricted by my own health. If you have a health issue, you could say, well, I simply cannot study as long because I have XYZ health issue that prevents that. And so both of these are not wrong, is the interesting thing. Both of those things, the outer influences and the inner influences, both exist. But the locus of control is where the person puts emphasis in their focus on. And the people that put an emphasis on the outer locus of control have across the board worse outcomes, both in their actual efforts and in their health. Because this is the idea that, well, why seek out preventative care and why take extra measures with your health if what happens with your health is largely out of your control because, oh, well, I'm in a city with a lot of smog and you can name all the things that would be out of your control, versus then putting the emphasis on the things that are in your control, whether you exercise, what you eat, whether you do decide to take preventative care. So this is an interesting thing because it to me, it resembles the argument of free will or not, because it is a choice of where you put emphasis on. And this ties in to a really cool idea from Greek tragedy that we'll get to shortly.
Yeah, before you go into Greek tragedy, the thing is, and this is why I hate this argument, you say it's your choice to decide where you place the locus of control, but then people that believe in determinism say it's not your choice to decide that anyway. And see, it just becomes this.
It's circular. It can be circular.
There's something I'm suspicious about it. I think it's a. I don't see any positive reason to believe that you don't have some amount of control over events. I can't imagine, who is the person arguing
here, I'll give
this
you
is
that.
really helpful? Okay.
Yes. So here we're gonna go into the other side of the argument, because it's good to kind of bolster that argument so we can really grapple with both sides of it. So I like to think of Hereditary as the world in which Sam Harris lives in. This is the world where you lack free will, which is things have been put in motion long before you ever knew about it, and the outcome is impending, and there's like a creepy naked guy standing in the darkness waiting for the inevitable to happen. That is the world in which, God bless him, I like Sam Harris, but I don't like his arguments against free will, because I think it's fucking depressing. And that's one of his arguments, is that, well, people just don't like it because it's hard to live that way. And yeah, of course it is hard to live that way. It fucking sucks. Why would you do anything if nothing that you do matters, because everything that you do is already predetermined by something that you don't know about? This is a very...
Has anyone asked him that? No, I mean, and I'm not super familiar with Sam Harris. I know that I thought that there was some sort of maybe influence with Buddhism on his thoughts about free will and determinism, but I could be wrong about that. But what I'm trying to get at is whether it's Sam Harris or someone else.
What's
the person that truly believes this, that truly believes everything is determined, how do they... This is why it becomes ultimately senseless. Because then you ask, why do you bother waking up?
Yeah.
I mean, but I guess you could say, well, because there's a chance that everything that is determined will result in a basically pleasurable outcome for myself. It just seems very...
Not a pleasant art. This is why I reject it, because I think we have organized our society around the idea of free will. We depend as human beings that are self-aware. That's the difference between animals and the human being, is that the human being can think about the choices they make and can think about their thought process in the making of that choice. And that's really, whether it's an illusion or not, that's what makes it such an attractive idea, and why we're so passionate most people about the idea that they have free will. You tell someone, you take the average person off the street and you say, oh, well, you did that and I attribute it to something besides your conscious efforts, and it's offensive. It's a kind of a sense of you don't have agency over your own life, and no one likes that idea. There's something inherently upsetting about the idea that you lack control over your very self and all aspects of your life.
And then they would just say, well, you think, they would just say, I don't know, whoever makes these arguments, I assume would say, oh, there isn't actually a difference between humans and animals. You just think that you think
about your choices,
are different, and that have some sort of notion of free will.
Well, that's the thing. It's an illusion, is the idea.
You frightened me. Hereditary frightens me. The movie Hereditary did frighten me, and you also frightened me when you said you wanted to discuss the difference between free will and determinism, because I was just, it's a long debate, and it's been going on for a long time.
And it's still unsolved. It's still not, because it's one of those things. It's almost a quasi-religious debate, because it is one of these things that you really can't point to any hard evidence to prove one way or the other, and people feel very passionately about the camp that they're in for the most part. Well, to give Sam Harris his due. His argument is that he makes an argument in that he kind of says, well, if you have a person, you have two people, and one lives a life, with child abuse, goes through trauma, is born into dire socioeconomic circumstances, and then becomes a criminal, and then you compare someone with an entirely different life who had all the things that person did not. Can you really say that the choices that the person made to become a criminal were just entirely truly free will, or were they largely set in motion by circumstances beyond their control? And he makes a worse argument, though. This argument, though, that is fair. I will give that more credit, and I will be more more interested in debating that idea. I don't like the one argument that he's made that's really not good. He says, well, imagine there have been cases where you have someone that they had a brain tumor, and that brain tumor pressed on a part of the brain that controlled violent impulses, and because of this they became a murderer. Well, I don't have that tumor, so I don't make those choices. Is that because I have chosen not to make it? It's like, well, most of us don't have a brain tumor that's a dire anomaly in the human biology for making a forced change. If you make a forced change in the brain, it's a little bit, that's kind of an odd argument, I think, because you're arguing something that's a very obvious external circumstance. No one's going to say that.
Yeah, but I understand where he's coming from, because he's taking a strictly materialist viewpoint, which is then reinforcing the idea of determinism.
He is, as far as I know,
insofar as that. Right, and insofar as that goes, I understand that argument. But to me, that's just... Okay, let me try to formulate this. Every argument for determinism that is based on a strictly materialist worldview, to me, only is explanatory after the fact, and not telling us anything about the way in which we live in each moment in our mind. Does that make sense?
Well, the other. Go on. Oh, we're so polite today.
I don't. I mean, like, I don't want to argue. I don't want to be too argumentative about something which I don't know about the nuance of Sam Harris's argument about determinism. It's all speculation. I just ultimately, whether or not it's true or not, I'm going to refuse to believe it.
Well, that's a good. You're not helping our argument
which I'm good at
with statements like that.
Why? Why? It's the ultimate. It's the only. I guess I don't even think it's required, but I do think it's a last resort. A last resort of the deterministic doll people.
Yeah.
If anything else, I just want the doll people to scream, no, I refuse it, I reject it, And so if I'm just a doll person in someone's fucking dollhouse, then I'm
At
just
least
going to
fight
be
against
a
the
doll
maker.
Right. I mean, and because why not?
Well, here's
Might
the
as well.
interesting thing. I think about this. So, there's that argument that you have Sam Harris with the brain tumor. But here's the thing: there's also a bunch of decisions that person with the brain tumor makes that aren't the result of a brain tumor. So it may be the case, and coming back to that idea of the outer and inner locus of control, it very well may be the case that we have more free will in certain circumstances and less over others. You do not have will over who your parents are, but you do have will over what you will eat next. And one of the interesting things for that argument that even the choices you make are the result of a chain of events. You had a thought, and that thought was inspired by something, and then you acted based upon that thought. So it's not truly like this spontaneous rising of will, or you say, I am going to eat a salad. It's more you see something like some video, and it's like, why it's important to eat salad, and you think, I should eat salad. Well, maybe I will eat salad. Okay, I will go eat salad. So this is kind of one of the arguments, is that it goes back to the Dole box determinism, that everything is the result of a chain that is put in motion previously. But this is also kind of a weird argument, because, what on God's earth, you don't just act all of a sudden. It's a weird conception of will, that it should be spontaneously arisen with no response to its environment. Nothing exists like that. And of course you'd say, well, nothing has free will. But I don't think I don't think will is something that requires an existence completely divorced from its environment. On the contrary, we exercise will in relation to our environment constantly. That's when will comes into place. When you wake up and decide, you know what, today I'm not going to skip breakfast. I'm going to change something. And I think change is one of the very interesting examples of why there are some holes in that free will argument. We do make changes. So how can that change spontaneously occur if it's not, of course, put into motion by other things, but it is a change in the exercise of will?
So the last thing I'll say about this, because I just consider myself totally against it. They would say that you're mistaking. So you're setting out a vision of outside external forces acting upon something that you're proposing and calling the will, as if the will is privileged over these other outside external forces and has some sort of ability to make choices based on the interaction with those forces. But then a strictly materialist person would say, what you're calling will is just the combination of a bunch of neurons firing in your brain in certain specific patterns that were already predetermined by genetics or other or environmental things, all this kind of stuff. So you're mistaking the notion of will for something that is above and is different than.
It's not like a conscious process.
Just
is the idea.
Materialism, right?
Yeah, I think.
Which again, I must reject, if for no other reason that.
You want to live a peaceful, semi-productive life.
Well, no, there's no peace in it either. That's the funny thing, right? Because I mean,
that's true.
In some sense,
Good point.
It's almost worse.
It is almost
the,
worse.
The one
actually.
Good argument for determinism you can make is that you can basically excuse everything.
Flaws.
Yeah, you can absolve. Right? You can say, well, this is just how the world was, which I can understand the reason to want to believe that.
But here's the thing, though. And this is why I think that really it comes down to the more interesting way to get some, how do you say, kind of make some ground with this argument is to look at its application in the real world. And again, so an extension of that idea of the inner locus of control versus the outer locus of control is the result of people over-identifying with either of these things. So it's interesting because there's this concept of defeatism and aspirationism. So this is another way to kind of understand the identification of oneself with will or lack thereof. So defeatism, people that are defeatist are going to tend to over-identify with things being out of their control. And that's kind of, this idea that, well, yeah, sure, I can start a business, but the economy's out of my control. The starting place that I'm starting at is largely out of my control. The chances I will get in starting that business are largely determined by luck. I can't go out. I don't have all the best connections. That's just where I'm starting at. So you would focus on all these things that are beyond your control, and it's a highly unmotivating, depressing outlook that tends to breed failure in people. Defeatism, it cuts down your reasons for trying. Now, it's interesting because aspirationism is the other extreme of this. So aspirationism would be a radical view of free will, which is everything is under the control of will. And I personally don't actually think that that's the right way either. I think it's a more pragmatic approach to view will as something that increases and decreases based upon where you're trying to apply it. Obviously not everything is under our control, and not everything is going to be a simple matter of willing yourself, willing cancer out of your body or something. That's not in your control largely. There are things that are in your control. Do you go to the doctor a lot? Do you follow the medical protocol that the doctor gives you? Those things would be more in your control, not the actual
I do not.
illness. No, I don't either. I guess we are defeatists and we're just here arguing for the sake of argument. But the aspirationist is the one that would believe cancer actually is entirely in your control. So, okay, maybe it's in your genetics, sure. But if you live right, if you exercise, if you eat properly, if you go to the doctor regularly, you can prevent even cancer. And if you get it, you can still heal it if you do everything right. These people also will fail and kind of devolve into a neurosis because not everything is in your control. There are some people that still remember that guy, the Men's Magazine guy that was like super fit and then got cancer at 40 and died. Yeah, there was this. Yeah, he was like I forgot what he was. He was like the owner or like somehow in charge of Men's Magazine, super fit guy. Obviously health was his life, and he got cancer and he died young. And so this is an example of, not everything is always in our control. And that's true. There are some places where you can will yourself to be the healthiest person, but there is still a degree of the world that is beyond the control of individual will. And so
I reject it. You're
an aspirationist?
I reject that also. I'm an extreme aspirationist, I guess. I might as well be that also. Because it's just No,
yeah.
Your balanced approach to this, and in your notes that you shared with me beforehand, you mentioned Stoicism as a.
It is kind of the balanced approach. Stoics take a more balanced approach to this, which I think is interesting because there is the arguments of free will go way back until, like you were saying, and the Stoics also took their own approach to will, and they did believe that there was that the most effective way for the human to progress throughout life was not to over-identify with a lack of free will or the radical free will, but was instead to see where you do have freedom and control and where you don't. And then you overemphasize those places in which you do have freedom and control. You should focus on these more. And this is the Stoic idea, but it's also a fairly well-researched concept in psychology that it is a healthier outlook for life to focus on the places in which you do have control as opposed to the places which you don't. And this is very basic cognitive behavioral CBT shit, like the therapy that tries to kind of reframe the way you think things, as opposed to taking a very catastrophic approach. Something happens, I'm going to look for the worst outcome possible. That's one of the things you do have control over. And the entire school of CBT, that therapeutic philosophy, that is one of the few types of therapy that actually has research showing its efficacy, it's based upon the premise that you do have some amount of control over at least the patterns of thought that you choose to apply to the world. So this is again the idea, like, okay, maybe we cannot prove one way or the other through even argument that there is or is not free will, but we can look at the outcome of these views. And the outcome of viewing that you have no control over your entire life and self is long been shown to be correlated with, negative outcomes, health, physical health, mental health, all that. So,
It's a lot to say.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I wanted to bring this back to the movie and one scene in particular that I'd mentioned to you, where she's working on one of her dollhouses after Charlie, her daughter, dies, and she's doing this scene. It's not to call them dollhouses isn't very accurate, actually, but she's working on this scene of the accident. Yeah, and her husband comes in and is horrified by this. Yeah, and says, don't let Peter see this. And she turns to him. It's a great moment. She turns to him and says, "Why? It's just a neutral, objective view of the scene." And there's something there that implies a kind of godliness to her aspect of creation, because that's how you would assume that a god would look at a scene, as this is just the omniscient, because there's omniscience implied in neutrality when looking at a scene like that. So I thought that was very small scene, but a fairly important scene, along with your theme of free will and determinism. And then we both were talking about, but you really went into the research of this. There's a line of dialogue when they're in the classroom, and this teacher is talking about the story of Hercules. You call it Heracles. I call it Hercules.
All right, you Roman.
And so I thought you would go ahead and take it away there on that discussion, because I've read a decent amount of Greek tragedy, and I know a little bit about that. But Hercules I mainly think of as a character from these films from the, I guess, late 70s or early 80s that would always be on television, where they had like a lot of claymation, and there was like really bizarre but cutting edge effects for there was this I don't know, I need to look into it more. There was this a lot of movies made
I like the
in
word
this style,
claymation.
or at least a couple of these movies made that were like based on Greek myths or Greek stories. Well, I've really kind of gone down a side road here. But Heracles, and the notion of, as you called it, I will say the word as soon as I find it. I can. Doesn't mean I'm going to say it correctly.
Yeah, me neither.
Hamartia?
I don't know. I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, but it is hamartia, maybe? Probably hamartia. I don't know. But this is an interesting thing. Yeah, probably, right? I should have checked that one out, but my Greek is a little rusty. So bear with us, guys. So the interesting thing that I was looking up Heracles. Let us be proper. I was looking up the story of Heracles, and maybe it is obnoxious for me to say Heracles and not Hercules.
I don't think
but it's like the stories are originally Greek, so I'm talking about the Greek,
correct.
I don't know, so that's why.
Hercules is the Roman name for the Greek hero. Let's just give our viewers this
Cut
background.
me a break, guys.
You implied it in a joke. Hercules is the Roman name for the Greek hero Heracles, the most
Yeah.
popular figure from ancient Greek mythology. Okay,
And they
big
just
claim
kinda-
'cause he's the most popular figure.
Yeah.
But so
kinda is.
and then I said, yeah, I guess, yeah,
He's really close, at least.
yeah. People know him.
Yeah.
I said that I use Hercules because in English, we're using the English language. We tend to take it from that Roman form as opposed to the Greek form. But
Yeah.
I actually endorse you calling him Heracles, and I'll call him Hercules.
I will continue. All right. So the interesting thing that I liked in this movie, after the third time of watching it, but this is not when I noticed this. As soon as whenever you have a movie where they show a professor speaking, you gotta pay attention because this is usually the director's way of straight up telling you some of the philosophy or whatever it is that they're really dealing with in the film because it's a really easy device to do that with, and Aster does a great job of using that device in this film because he does it in such a cool little subtle way. So let's do Heracles first. So in that scene where there's he's in the classroom, it's a little bit earlier on in the movie before all the demon possession stuff starts happening, and the teacher is talking about Heracles, and essentially he talks about this story and where the tragedy of Heracles, which I think it's referring to the story The Madness of Heracles, which was a play written by someone, I don't remember his name, and it is essentially paints Heracles as this tragic figure, which is a central idea in Greek tragedy, the tragic figure. But what makes him a tragic figure is his lack of choice in this situation. So the teacher asks, is it less or more tragic that Heracles has no choice? And I'm not entirely sure which story that's referring to. I think it's the Madness of Heracles, but in the Madness of Heracles, is that if that's what it is, the Madness of Heracles, essentially what happens is he goes off to do some shit in the underworld or something, and while he's busy doing that, some other shitty deity is like, well, I'm gonna take over your land, Heracles, I'm gonna take your wife, I'm gonna take your kingdom and all that. And so they're about to execute Heracles' father-in-law and the wife and the kids, and Heracles comes back and rescues them all and saves his land, but the gods intervene, and that is where the madness of Heracles comes from. I think it's Hera that does this, because Hera was a nasty bitch. She didn't give a fuck. She didn't like Heracles. She was real mad because Zeus was always cheating on her, and so Hera was nothing to be fucked with. And she is the one, I believe, that sends madness upon Heracles. And so he kills everybody that he just rescued, his wife and his kids. I think he kills the father-in-law too. And so this is the one of the lines from the Madness of Heracles is, when was ever a man so ill-fated? And this comes back to that idea of fate. And so the teacher asks, is it less or more tragic that Heracles had no choice? It may not be referring to this exact story, but if this story is still an example of the tragic figure and the idea of Greek tragedy that's central to that, which is a character that is fated to lose, essentially. So even though Heracles comes back and rescues his family from death, it was never going to end that way, because Hera was going to make sure that he lost. So is it more tragic or less that he had no choice in the matter? And a student responds and says, which is great, because the student has this like middle school voice, and it's kind of quiet, and she goes very like, well, without choice, life is more tragic, because we're all like these pawns in this horrible, hopeless machine, I think. And so it's very easy to tune that line out, because it sounds like, and
the
it's like
camera doesn't focus on it either.
The person is unfocused. You're focusing on the main character.
It moves away. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's totally a kind of like a background voice, but it's actually one of the defining lines of philosophy for the film, which is it is more tragic because they are all pawns in this horrible, hopeless machine. And so you contrast this with the idea of the dollhouse, which is these figures that have no control over their lives and they are fated to be put into whatever situation the doll maker puts them in. And then you contrast this with the idea of the horror movie itself, which is these figures that are put into a plot with a defined ending, and for all their efforts and all their fighting, they are still going to meet that fate in the end of the film. And so that's the part of Heracles there, which is really interesting. And but it's important to see the larger part of this. It's not super specific to Heracles, but Greek tragedy instead. And that comes back to the idea of hamartia, which translates to the error of judgment. And this is a kind of a central idea in Greek tragedy, which is the influence of our actions upon our suffering. So Greek tragedy often was centered around the family and the tragedy of our choices and the intervention of the gods. So Hereditary...
I don't understand something. I have to stop because I don't understand something.
Yeah.
If hamartia is the error of judgment, doesn't that imply that there is something beyond fate that causes this? Because if you had an error of judgment, if it is your own error and that you own that in some sense, and it's not fated already, then there is some sense that not everything is fated. So I don't understand that.
Yes, good. That's a perfect question, because this is why this movie is not a perfect prescription of the lack of free will. Now, hamartia, I wish I could say it right and with confidence, but you get the point. Hamartia is...
Say it right. Try it.
I don't know what right is. I think it's... I have to say it with tentatively.
There shouldn't be a sh. There should be no sh in it. TIA.
Hamartia. They don't have that in the language? Okay.
Well, I'm just gonna say it. Who cares? No one knows.
All right.
No one. There's some guy who speaks ancient Greek that's like,
let us
these
know.
Dummies.
Yeah. These
but
dummies.
Who cares?
Okay.
No one cares.
So the idea of hamartia does leave room for will. It does leave room for will. And so what's so interesting about hamartia as a concept for this movie is that this movie does kind of toy with the idea that they did have some will. So there's this idea that everything has been set in motion, that there's a bunch, you have that, I forget what her name is, the Joanne, that's kind of like, oh, I'm just here to help. But Joanne already knows what's going on. Joanne is in on the plan. Joanne is setting up events that seem to happen serendipitously, but they are, she's part of this bigger plan that the family is unaware of, which is something that I find very this is part of the movie that really bothered me, and it's a very subtle kind of horror, which is these characters that everybody knows what their end is except for them. There's something very vulnerable about that position where other people know your tragic, pathetic end, and you are, ignorantly going about your life grocery shopping and saying, well, this is weird. Wow, I can't believe I met Joanne at the store. And Joanne's like, this stupid asshole. She doesn't know that I have her daughter in a cabin or whatever, or some crazy shit. So I think it's very, this is one of the weird, ominous elements of the film, is that the family actually does act as if they are totally, and this is the fun idea in this film, is that you have these people that do act, as most of us do, that they have total free will over everything. And there is something that has been set in motion, and there are players in their life that are enacting something that they don't realize they have little control over. And so hamartia, as a lens for viewing this film, the error of judgment and the influence that the individual's actions have upon their own suffering, is tied along with the intervention of the gods, which is a big deal in this film, because this is the whole thing, is that there is the King Payman and this cult intervening into these people's lives to force upon them a fate. But they make choices. They do make choices. And you have that scene at the dinner table where the mom kind of like loses her shit at the son, and she says, I know it's not your fault, but your sister is dead, and this is what happened, and it's like she does blame him in a way. And then he turns back to her and says, well, you sent her to the party. And this is kind of that very simple idea that you made one very small, very seemingly insignificant choice that may have been the crucial difference in a tragedy. And that's the idea of hamartia. It is what was the individual's error that contributed to their suffering that makes them this tragic figure when there is an intervention with the gods here, which of course that pole that she gets beheaded on had the insignia. That wasn't entirely an accident, but the mother did send her to the party. What if she had not sent her to the party? Did she have a choice? Did that choice to send her to the party put into motion something more tragic, and that's when the gods intervened? Or could she have not sent her to the party, and maybe it would have happened anyway in some other realm, but we don't know? And that's the kind of idea of hamartia, this Greek tragedy, that you have these tragic characters that are being impressed upon by the gods, but they still do make choices that seem to contribute to their own suffering. And you had a great line that actually you accidentally said. Yeah, you accidentally said a line that was that is, I found a corollary to it in 7 Against Thebes, which I think another play in in the Greek tradition. And so that line was, from ills given by the gods there is no escape. And your line was, the gods manipulate us from the lies of our own mouths. And it is cool because you can see that there is a very strong theme in this movie of the divine or demonic intervention and the role that the figure plays in facilitating that into even a further tragedy.
I do remember saying that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about Hercules.
Well, I like to think about Hercules a lot too. But this is the thing, is that in this that ties into the idea of the family itself, because that's why we were talking about that, last time, which was, how interesting when you see a movie like this that the husband and the wife made choices where they lie to each other on several occasions. He doesn't tell her that the cemetery called and say that someone dug up the grandmother's grave. Correct. And she doesn't tell him that she's going to a support group. So that's why. So now, right, I had forgotten why I had said that extremely wise line. Yes. How wise that I am. But then I forgot when I said it. And it was because we were discussing that moment, which is key to the film, which is that both husband and wife lie to each other back to back. The husband receives a phone call and doesn't tell his wife that her mom, he doesn't tell his wife about the desecration of the grave there. Yeah. And then she immediately, the next sentence, tells him that she's going to see a movie when she's actually going to not go see a movie. Yes. And it's that point where you let the evil in, because it's that point those lies are errors of judgment in a way, and it maybe something could have been prevented if they didn't lie to each other at that point. Yeah. Maybe something could have been prevented if, when the mother tells Peter, take your sister to the party, maybe he could have said, look, Mom, my sister is like cutting off birds' heads, and there's something, we all know there's something wrong with Charlie. Maybe she shouldn't be at a party with parties. A high school kid. Right. It's not working out. Maybe could she just hang out here, but instead there's this lack of communication between them. And then, he doesn't so much lie to her at the party itself, but just wants to
get rid of her.
Yeah.
You know, and says go and eat some cake. Which again, I mean, here, you know, I don't know, we don't like to get bogged down in the details of films.
No.
But that is one of those moments that
yeah.
this is another. Okay, so this is a movie that I do respect as being nearly perfect in tone, and I talk about that a lot. When I talk about movies, that there is a consistent tone throughout it, and this movie almost never misses anything. And it doesn't in this scene either. But that moment where the brother tells his sister, "Yeah, go eat some cake," and then you think, well, she has an allergic reaction. You know that already because the father, I think, said there's no nuts in that candy bar, right?
Yeah.
And you think, well, like, okay, does she not have the EpiPen that people carry that are allergic to nuts? And does she not understand that she can't just randomly eat cake with nuts in it? I mean, I don't have a nut allergy, so I'm not trying to down anybody with nut allergies, but I would assume that anyone with potentially fatal nut allergies is a little more careful. But Charlie,
EpiPen.
I mean,
Charlie's
then again,
also
so it's one of those
not normal.
movies. Right, it's one of those times in a horror movie when you do have that moment where you think, "What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't go eat the chocolate cake with the person cutting up a bunch of nuts. I mean, it's not a good idea. Don't do it." But you know,
that's kind of the thing that's interesting about this movie is there's very, very, very few parts of this movie where you say, oh, well, fuck this character, like that's stupid, you know. And that's kind of why I think it's such a good kind of story in the spirit of Greek tragedy, because there are errors of judgment in this film, and they're almost all tragically human enough to still stay with the characters and still stay invested in the film. Because I know when I watch a horror movie and they do some stupid stuff, I'm like, I don't even care if you die. Like, that's just, you know, you brought that one on yourself. Like, I can't, you know, it's the idea that you have to make, I forgot what there's a certain principle. It's like the idiot, I don't know, something about like the character can't be an idiot, you know, because then it's like, it's just you don't sympathize with the character, and you have to sympathize enough with the character to stay invested in their story and to hope for them, you know, and to kind of care. If the character's an idiot, then you don't care, you know. You say, well, that's what happens when you're an idiot. But you know, there's just enough with that scene that it's like, well, she's a kid, she's obviously not very salient, or you know, like she doesn't have the ability to interact socially. Right. That's the other thing. She goes into the room and is just like wheezing in the corner. It's like, girl, you need to speak up. But you know, this is the thing. This is a child that seems like she's not. Something's wrong. I don't do well at parties. Yeah. I don't do well at parties either. No one does as badly as Charlie. So she really. Yeah, I mean, you know, she went at least. Give her that. I wouldn't even go. Did she have a choice? This is another. Did Charlie have free will? She didn't really. They kind of just told her, "You're going to the party." And she didn't even seem to really want to. No. She just wants to fucking go out and worship Satan and and do whatever she's doing. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because again, you have the family as a source of horror, you know, that they kind of enact horror upon each other. One of the best scenes in that movie is, well, at least for Toni Collette in terms of her acting skills, was when she blows up at Peter at the table. And that's, you know, such a common scene also, this a fight between family at the dinner table. Of course, the context is very unusual and abnormal, but the idea of strife between mother and teenage son, and the pacifist father saying that's enough, you know, this is a very common theme. This is common life. This is everyday family life. So that's kind of what I love about this movie also, is that there are so many scenes that are truly just life. And I think one of the best parts about the movie that shows so much of horror is just everyday life, was how actually terrifying the allergy scene was. Even before she got beheaded, they did such a good job in this movie of making the allergy and the the allergic reaction itself seem so horrifically terrifying, you know. And it's a funny thing because this is normal. That's not a demon. That's not anything unusual or gory. That's just a regular illness and a regular way to die that is part of everyday life, and it's absolutely horrific. And there's so much in everyday life that is of horror. And that's why I think that this movie, one of the interesting, and just to go one more little Greek tidbit before we tie up.
Before you do that, I am. I feel like I haven't brought the rage yet to the podcast, and the internet loves rage.
Usually, I'm the one that brings the rage.
You do. Toni Collette.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's
deserved at least a nomination for Best Actress, and I understand that it's difficult to nominate.
She did deserve a nomination.
Actors and actresses in horror movies, and
horror has long been shunned, and that's wrong.
It has been shunned.
I'm
looking it up, and I could be wrong. You know, I may be giving out misinformation on the internet, but I don't think she was even nominated.
I don't think she was. I don't recall. I think that I remember, like, in at least the horror people, you know, people that appreciate horror. This was a frustrating one because, you know, you get it, slashers and shit like that. No one cares. But Jesus, this was not even a gory, you know, bloodbath movie. The story was rich. The film was beautiful, excellent, interesting, original in so many ways. The acting was incredible. I mean, Toni Collette, what the fuck, you know? Jesus Christ. How can you not at least I mean, she really should have taken it, because that scene where she's I cried. The scene where she is right after she realizes that I mean, she goes out to the car and finds Charlie beheaded in the car, and you just hear the audio first of her realizing that, and then you see the scene where she's in the bedroom, you know, sobbing on the floor, and the husband is you know, holding her, and it's just like, oh, just even thinking of that film, like the emotion that she was able to get there without being over the top was so good and raw and painful and so good.
She did. She went over the top and succeeded, which is something that's very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, so I'm not going to go on and on about it because there's no reason to, but there is a scene where she goes into Peter's room and is going after him hardcore. And there's this moment. It's really actually one of the scariest moments in the film for me, where you see her briefly doused in some sort of fluid, and just the rage and anger that she has in that moment. And I'm not sure if you know what it is. Like that's when I watched it the first time again, I had to pause the movie a few times. I have seen a lot of things that have bothered me in this world and in film. And I really did. I had to pause it, not because it was gory, not because it was particularly violent, but that scene where it troubled me a great deal. She deserves
at least recognition.
Honestly, everyone in the film
the actor
did an
that
excellent
did
job.
Peter did a really good job too. Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with. There's nothing bad about the movie. There's not a
really
single.
There's
not a single scene. There's not a single actress.
Not a piece of dialogue. Not anything. Man,
there really isn't. I mean, and I look, and I will bring it up, and I will. But there isn't anything here. So we're done with. Are we done with Heracles?
Well, here's the thing.
We're done with Heracles. But can I just randomly mention things? Because I know you hate that, but I also like to just randomly mention things. Am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed
Well,
to deviate? I have free will.
Hold your ass on for a second, because I'm not done
Free will.
with that
I'm
part
radical
there.
free will.
You better. Well, I'm gonna be a Sam Harris here, determined that you are not going to move on from this part right now. Here's the thing, though.
I accept it.
What I really like also about, and this is why I think it's a fatal, absolutely foolish, naive mistake to discount the horror genre as a whole, and to, really not even, recognize these movies as worthy of mainstream appeal and awards and shit like that. Who gives a fuck about awards? No one fucking cares. It's, no one that makes art really gives a shit about awards anyway. But the thing is, I do know that horror does get so shunned, and I think that's unfortunate because people miss out. I know people just don't like to watch horror, and I get it because it's not fun or whatever. Like, every time I watch this movie, I lose sleep. It is deeply disturbing. This movie deeply fucking disturbs me. I cannot get certain scenes out of my mind. I mean, first of all, here's what is so good about it, though. And when you have a horror movie that's so just so right, he does stuff with the horror scenes in this film that they show you something in a way that's evolutionary in human beings. So it's when you watch shit like this, you need to ask questions. Why does it bother me when I see what is bothersome about this scene? We all know what is bothersome about seeing someone beheaded. Okay, fine. But look at the choices in this film that enact horror and disturb you without even showing blood or violence. One of the most frightening parts of this film to me is Toni Collette's now possessed body in the corner of Peter's room like this, not moving. Whole scene is still, nothing is happening. Peter just wakes up, doesn't know his entire family is dead or possessed, and doesn't know what his fate is to be. Wakes up, and Toni Collette, it's just the worst, best scene ever. And then he's kind of, there's this sense of the eeriness that everybody knows what that feeling is, where you don't know that something's wrong, but you know that something's wrong. That's very important. That is something that is deeply instinctual in human beings. That's why horror works. That's why we can watch a scene with a person in the corner and we all know why it's disturbing without having to say, well, what's scary about someone hovering in the corner? We know why it's scary because there's something wrong. And it shows that this is not a natural thing for humans to do, and it disturbs. And so I love that scene because I think it is the most, if there's anything anybody takes away from this podcast, let it be that scene as a representation of what life is like if you truly have no free will. Because that means what you have is an impending fate lurking, always watching, waiting for you while you kind of look around and think about what decisions you'll make. It doesn't matter. Your fate is in the corner waiting for you to make the next move so it can do what it was going to do all along. And that is one of the scariest parts of this film. Forget when she's beheading herself. That shit is disturbing. It's really well done. Very good. I really don't like the part where she's banging her head against the door because it's just, again, it's supernatural. And there's something very disturbing about that. It's just, humans don't move that way. And it's that. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's just that humans don't move that way. And that's why it's so deeply disturbing, because we know that is not a human anymore. And that's what it is. That's what it communicates. We're watching, it's a human body, but it's not a human anymore because it doesn't move.
Well,
like
what
a
you
human.
know is it's a possessed human.
Exactly.
Possessed by something that does
not
not care about the physical laws of the known world, and also doesn't care about the body in which it's doesn't care about the body in which it's inhabiting.
And that
because
means
clearly
it's
whatever
anti-human in a way.
Right. Whatever demon is doing that is making her hit her head against the thing no good.
And then behead herself.
And also making her beheading herself also no good. She, however, does not kill Peter. Peter kills himself. He jumps out a window.
Yeah, which that's again, it's a kind of an interesting way to do this. That's a weird thing about this film is there's all these little things that kind of switch up the storyline, and I love that.
Yeah, there's too many. I mean, maybe instead of, I know you like structure, instead of just saying a bunch of random instead of saying a bunch of random things about the film which intrigue me, I won't do that if you prefer not to. Maybe a bonus episode.
Well, wait.
I don't know.
Here, I'll let you rattle off shit.
You're always telling me to wait.
Okay, you okay, rattle off the things now, and then I have the finishing line, and then we sum up, and then we're good to go. Then we got it.
It's too much structure. See, you are destroying the free will of the podcast by structuring it too tightly. Mm-hmm. Your notes are, Tony Collette, in the in the ceiling. Our fate, the fate of the podcast, is predetermined by the notes that you write. And then, I mean, how am I supposed to talk about ideas like, I have to go back to my notes. Okay, well, brief mention also. There's one other Greek myth that's spoken about in the film, and that is the story of King Agamemnon's daughter,
right,
which he had to sacrifice to appease one of the gods. And we don't have to go into the story again. I mean, I feel like, are we overburdening viewers with our interpretations of Greek myths? I don't know. Perhaps.
I mean, if you're
There's
watching
so many
this
things.
and you don't want to hear about Greek myths, you are lost. Like
right.
So you're in trouble.
So there's too many things, because I got that question of why are they taking their shoes off when they walk into the house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very carefully
maybe
shown...
viewers can chime in.
Yeah,
viewers can chime in.
I'd like to do that. It would be cool if people could kind of give their opinions on some of the things that we saw, but we didn't really kind of like the shoe thing. It's a very conscious decision to show on several occasions. Take off your shoes. Take off your shoes. Why would you put that in a film? Possibly just to normalize. Just to add in some sense of normality. This is a family. They take off their shoes. Whatever. Maybe.
No, there's something else going on.
I think so too.
I believe there's something else going on.
The idea of taking off the shoes this is not just a random thing. Like, it has a long history from a time when, we were more vulnerable to disease. I mean, different cultures have been way more strict on that and have preceded the kind of just take off your shoes at the door. It's seen as disrespectful in some cultures. I think certain religions you cannot wear shoes into the temple. So this idea of removing the shoes is is deeper culturally than just a little custom of one individual family's home. So if people have kind of ideas for these weird things, maybe we can put out some things that we haven't fully gotten theories for, and let the people speak.
There's another thing, which is one line, which I think is the only maybe joke in the movie, though you think there's another joke, or another moment of comedy, where the father says he looks at the script on the paper that is foreign to him, and he says, "What language is even that?" Which isn't correct English. Like, but that's so extreme. Maybe I'm looking too deeply into that, but I see that as an actual joke. I have a lot of questions. What are the ants symbolic of? Why are the ants there?
Yeah, the ants are a big one.
What's going on with the ants?
Ants are recurred throughout the film on several, at least in 2 scenes. 3 really.
Yep. There's a lot of questions, but my free will determines that I will leave those questions now and allow you to sum up in your predetermined way.
All right. So here's the fate of this podcast was always coming to an end with the idea of catharsis, which catharsis is a word that we kind of use like, it came to a cathartic ending or whatever. And we use it very, normally. But it actually is a Greek concept that Socrates, I didn't know that it was, that Socrates kind of spoke about this idea of catharsis. He believed that plays.
I thought it was Aristotle, by the way.
You are wrong. I'm pretty sure
Okay.
you're wrong about that.
Fair enough.
Because I was researching it, and old Socrates.
I didn't research it.
Yeah, so
okay.
differ.
We pronounce it, you should pronounce it Socrates.
Let's leave that. Leave that one alone. Now, so Socrates, that's horrible. I'm going to do him a favor and keep Socrates.
That's a...
So he believed, and plays in Greek life was very, the Greeks are known for their rich cultural creations, plays and art and all that. But Socrates believed that plays provided a sense of catharsis, which is kind of where this idea comes from, by calling up certain emotions and allowing them to come out. And it created this sense of cleansing, which is a kind of, a little woo-woo of an idea for old Socrates. But it's a cool idea because this is what we do when you watch a movie that makes you
Did you just
cry.
say Socrates had a kind of woo-woo idea? Is that what you just said?
I mean, yeah, he said it cleansed you to watch plays. Like, come on, old buddy. Like, that's very, new agey. I like that, though. I like it. I fuck with Socrates as, a hippie in a way. Now... it is kind of an idea that you could hear like, oh, this cleanses you. We say that all the time now. It cleanses you. Cleanse yourself. But what really is that? And the idea, I like this coming from the Greek tradition of plays being cathartic in that they call up certain emotions and the expression of those emotions almost in an artificial way, forcing them up through watching a play that is meant to call up sadness, anger, laughter, whatever. And that experiencing that emotion in the realm of the arts is cathartic in that it's a weird idea because it's almost like this idea of like exercise your emotions, bring them out in this format, in this forum, so that they can, you can be maybe in touch with them in a way. It's like a healthy way to let them out instead of, oh, well, we never express anger or sadness, but then the idea is that it would come out in civil life, in the society, rather than in this more healthier controlled forum of watching a movie. Better to watch your Greek play and get mad at a fictitious character and then go home than to be in Greek society and let your anger come out at your family or your neighbor. So this is kind of this idea that these plays were providing a health service in that they called up emotions purposely so that people could feel the catharsis of going through those emotions. And that is what horror does. That's why
I think
you
that
need
you're
horror.
So I think that you are slightly looking at this concept through a modern lens and missing one aspect of it, which is that for the Greeks, these plays, especially in the early, this becomes complex also, they were religious rites. They were religious festivals. So your point about thinking of horror as...
Well, those religious festivals, like the Dionysian cult and all of that, this was the same idea. Like that idea also came out in this that we would use these rituals to allow for the behavior to come out that would normally be unwelcomed in or destructive in regular society. Dionysus, the cult of Dionysus was a big one in which that happened. This idea that allowed these behaviors and sentiments to come out in this controlled, ritualized area rather than all the time throughout civil life.
There's something about that sounds like a modern perspective on what I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm saying it seems modern, like a modern perspective on what we assume they thought. Now, you may be correct in your research, but I see it more as I feel like to see it outside of a religious function, the early Greek playwrights is probably a mistake. But then you can say, well, that this notion of catharsis is a part of the religious experience, and then that makes sense. So, very well. Very well.
Do you
I
concede?
I Friedrich Nietzsche and the birth of tragedy. We're not going to go into that. Okay. Very
It
well.
always ends with Nietzsche.
It's
You want to tie it up with Nietzsche?
I don't.
Always welcome. Nietzsche's always welcome.
You've thrown me for a curve here. Is that what they say? They throw me for a curve.
Isn't it a loop?
You throw me for a loop.
I don't
can't
like
even
either
speak
of them.
English at this point.
Yeah. King Payman coming in.
No, King Payman's not rocking out over here. Okay, I'm not going to
That was
argue with your
anti-cathartic. It's the opposite of catharsis, whether you agree with my definition or not. The point is, watch horror movies and appreciate, cry, be mad, be scared. It's good for you. Not if you lose as much sleep as I do over this movie. That's not always great. But you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to watch this shit. Because you know what? I think in a way, I really do think that our lives, we can watch horror now because we don't have much horror in our lives. Yeah, sure. Oh, people die. Of course, there is horror in the world. But in the individual's life, in our society, for the most part, you don't have, we're not beset by demons and all these horrible things that we watch in film. And I think there is a catharsis.
I think we are.
Well,
I'm becoming argumentative at the end of the podcast. You're trying to end it.
And
You're trying to end it. I'm
to-
just becoming
yeah.
obstinate and argumentative.
This is
I mean, look at the prevalence of mental illness in our society, and then tell me that we're not, besieged by demons. Granted, I mean, I'm not saying they're actually King Payman. I'm just saying that, I get your broader point that we're not dying of, I was going to say a disease, but then it's like, well, we kind of, there is.
Yeah, I know. You can't say that anymore.
But I understand. I know. That's unfortunate.
No.
Life is better now.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well,
life is better now than it was.
Look.
Even though I was just saying yesterday that I wanted to live in, okay.
Yeah, you were.
Go off on that.
Well, okay. You can't do that to people. You can't say, just the other day, never mind. This is so anti-catharsis. Like, Socrates is in his grave right now, just not giving a fuck because he's in his grave and he wouldn't care what we're doing.
I've told you that I reject the idea of video confession,
Well, you have.
No one needs to know what
you video confessed more than I have.
What?
You video confessed today. Am I hallucinating?
About what?
Hiding your little face on the beheading scene.
Oh,
you forgot.
It was a. I'm gonna edit that out. It was just a fast reaction. It really just showed the manly nature of my extreme reflexes that I was.
Yeah.
I basically was punching the horror, but as I was punching the horror and showing my dominance over it, I happened to also put my hands over my eyes.
Yeah, because, which is a very dominant behavior.
That's what happened. So.
Well, no, I mean, again, this is why I think that horror movie is so good. When a horror movie can do that to you, and it just, it's touching on a true. It's real. Like there's a truth to it. It affects.
I was watching it in a very I was watching it in a very large screen in a little home theater type setup with a lot of surround sound, which, to be fair, the sound, another thing we could talk about a long time about this film, really good. Yeah. So it was an intense situation.
Just all around great.
And then all around great. I will also say that after watching the film, I also did, for a short period of time, and I do mean a very short period of time, would occasionally look up at the ceiling to make sure Toni Collette wasn't hovering.
I
didn't actually think she was there. I didn't actually think she was there. Want to make it clear, but there were a few times where I was like,
And that's really that's a testament to the film, because you would never
It is.
imagine why in the hell would there ever be a person, like a danger in the ceiling, in the corner of a ceiling? That's how affecting that movie was, that it was so, something about it got so in the body that felt so real and creates such a natural reaction of horror that it's almost like it has a leftover effect for a few days. Like I will every now and then, look around and look in the reflections of the windows and make sure I'm not hallucinating and that there's not actually the grandma just standing there. First part of the film that was fucking horrific. She's just there like, it's like, oh, we're in for it. I don't like it. It's a really well done, like when you can do horror without any figure moving or anything happen and it's traumatizing for a day or two, you know what the fuck you're doing. Toni Collette was robbed. Okay. All right. Tune in for the next one. Bye.
Are you just going to scream into the microphone to end every podcast?
Yeah, I think I might.
Is that the new plan? Very well.
Just, yeah.
All right.
All right. Throw in the mic. Throw the mic.